You are listening to Through the Rec Specs. Now, your host, Adam Hall.
That's right, sports fans. Welcome to Through the Rec Specs, a sports podcast from the fans for the fans. And we appreciate you tuning in this week and putting the Rec Specs on, seeing things how we see it in the world of sports. Always want you to follow us on Twitter at the Rec Specs. Any of your valuable questions, comments, or just statements that you want to make towards the show are very much appreciated. Also, the recspecs@gmail.com. Hit us up on there. Y'all do a great job of sending in questions and comments. Jared, looks like we're tag teaming this guy tonight. Bryce is on the road traveling, and we wish him happy travels. And he might be the lucky one out of this, as we are going to start our countdown from the bottom up of the SEC for the upcoming football season.
Yeah, it looks like we're one man down, and looks like we're going to have to Iron Man this. You up for the challenge, Adam?
I think we can do it. Like I said, I think Bryce gets off the hook here. I don't know how long we can talk about the teams that we're going to cover tonight, but it's an exciting time for Through the Rec Specs. Football season is on the horizon, and we're going to get the opportunity over the next 6 weeks to look into the SEC and dive head first.
Yeah, kind of dissect it a little bit and see, how it's going to stand. Last year, it looked like the West dominated a little bit more than the East, had a little bit better teams. It looks like that's the same trend this year.
Yeah, I think so. When we look at it, obviously we don't want to give away the whole show in just a couple of minutes.
Right.
But what we're going to do over the next 6 weeks is count from the bottom up. Bryce, Jared, and myself have compiled the stats. We think that we know where each of the teams in both the west side and the east side of the SEC conference, we think we know where they're going to finish, and we're pretty confident about it.
Yeah, I think so. And I've actually kind of stacked that up to some publications, and it's running about the same, So be surprised if it might be different in a couple spots, but I think it's pretty solid presentation.
Well, just looking at the SEC overall, a couple of coaching changes, a couple of new faces. Just give the fans a little bit of a perspective of what we're looking at for the SEC this coming year. Yeah,
I think you're going to see a huge hire down in Florida, Muschamp. I know you're looking forward to seeing him, Adam, what he can do. And he brings along a heralded offensive coordinator from Notre Dame. Help me with
Charlie Weiss.
Charlie Weiss. How could I forget?
And not just heralded in the offense of Notre Dame, but also with the New England Patriots, leading the Patriots to a couple Super Bowl rings.
Yeah, he has 2 or 3 rings with them, so he has a lot of experience there. And it's interesting. I'm looking forward the most to see what he can bring to the offense and if they can stack up the yards like we're expecting them to. So
well, you have Muschamp, who is a very highly touted defensive mind, and then you have Charlie Weiss, who's one of the best offensive minds, or so we think.
Yeah.
Do you think it's going to be a challenge for him to kind of get the Urban Meyer recruits into his system?
I think it's going to be a challenge, and I know we were watching the media days here, and I think it's going to take, kind of like with Urban Meyer, it took him about 2 or 3 years to actually get his philosophy ingrained and to actually see the results on the field. And I think you're going to see the same thing. They might not run the table, as so to speak, this year, but it might be 2 or 3 years down the road if everybody gets on board that you could see them running it again in the SEC.
And I guess maybe the bigger news is Urban Meyer actually leaving Florida, after building a highly successful program there.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing we're going to have to watch is, can Muschamp keep the torch and carry it, or do you think that pressure is just going to get too much to him? Because this is his first head coaching job. Mm-hmm. So is that going to be too much pressure on him, or do you think he can handle it and bring an SEC championship, bring an NCAA championship to Florida? It's
going to be tough, and we're going to count up, I guess we would say. Normally you count down, but we're going to count up, do things a little bit differently on Through the Rec Specs, and we're going to be able to look at Florida in a couple of weeks and see what we think about them. Another new face is James Franklin, coming from Maryland, and he's got the I guess it's a difficult privilege of taking over an SEC school, but it just so happens to be one that's usually at the bottom of things.
Yeah, he takes a fresh approach, and he's already putting some commits out there, which Vandy hardly ever gets, some 3- and 4-star guys. Fresh perspective, he came out with a quote talking about recruiting at Vandy. The recruit, he's going to have the best of everything, which is a world-class education and an opportunity to play in the best conference in the USA, which is the SEC.
Of course.
So what do you think, Adam? Is that a fresh perspective? Is that a selling point? A lot of people going to be on board with that?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to recruit in the SEC as is. When you couple it with the opportunity to get state-of-the-art education at Vanderbilt, might even make it a little bit more tougher. We know that a lot of the athletes aren't going to be able to get into the higher profile schools such as Vanderbilt, but I think that this guy has the right attitude approaching his job. In one article I was reading, he wasn't even named the Vanderbilt coach yet, and he told his family, hey, we're moving there. I'm confident that we're going to get this job and that we're gonna start a new life in Nashville. And I think that he's approaching it the right way. It is going to be an uphill climb for him the first couple of years. And, the SEC is wild. We've seen it over the past couple of years. If he can get a couple of key wins, who knows what can happen.
Yeah, it's just fresh. It's good to see somebody that positive. And, you're always going to be very positive in your first year, first head coaching job. But it would be interesting to see if he can compete in the SEC.
You're listening to Through the Rec Specs, a sports podcast from the fans for the fans. And without further ado, one name that has been in the SEC for a while, and we're going to start our count up from the bottom, and we're going to preview the Ole Miss Rebels, who I guess the students voted for the Star Wars squid face looking fellow Admiral Akbar as the new mascot for the Rebels, and
got thrown down.
Got vetoed. So
vetoed.
I guess we can call them the Ole Miss Rebel Smoky Black Bears. But the Ole Miss Rebels coming off a bad season after the first 2 seasons in Houston Nutt's tenure as the coach were pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think he compiled 18 wins, 2 bowl victories. And
one of those was a blowout at Texas Tech.
Yeah, exactly. And Texas Tech was actually having a really good year that year, right? And it was looking to win the Big 12. Fell a little bit short in the last few games, and had a lot of people around the Grove excited that this program was on the rise, and then just flatlined last year. What can you tell us about that? What happened to them, Adam?
Well, I mean, we looked at the rise of some of the programs last year. Obviously, Alabama coming off of a national championship the year before and having an impressive season last year as well. But not only Alabama, but the rise of Arkansas with Bobby Petrino, and that LSU is always going to be tough with Les Miles. I think that Houston Nutt was fortunate enough to get in there early on and win some of those key games, and with some of those guys and some of the recruits that Bobby Petrino and Nick Saban and Les Miles bring in, Houston Nutt's not as good of a recruiter as some of those guys.
Yeah, it's tough when you have all those guys around you, and Auburn, Alabama to the east of you, and then you got Les Miles to the south of you. I mean, it's hard to, and you got your Florida old offensive coordinator there in the same state battling you, and he's bringing a lot of excitement in his program. It's hard to contend with that.
And they definitely didn't get off to the right foot last year, losing in overtime 49-48 against Jacksonville State.
Yeah, I remember watching that. I remember watching those highlights. I think, was it like triple overtime, or it was definitely in overtime. Don't know how many it went, but I just remember that guy.
It's just something. It's a game that you can't lose if you're an SEC school.
Yeah, I just remember just some rinky-dink play over the middle. He just throws it over his helmet, and guy runs in for a touchdown. So, that was a tough way, and it was hard for them to bounce back, and shows 1-7 in the SEC. So
4-8 overall. They beat some of the smaller schools on their schedule: Tulane, Louisiana Lafayette, and I guess the lone SEC win against Kentucky, and then had a win against
heartbreaking
against Fresno State. But as we look at Ole Miss for the upcoming year, they're going to be struggling at the quarterback position, it looks like.
Yeah, I think going into spring, they counted on their boy Nathan Stanley to really be the leader, really be the guy to kind of bring the offense together. And what does he do but quits the team?
How does that happen in the SEC?
Well, what was more important than playing football in the South, Adam?
Not much.
Yeah, I guess going to school. I don't know. I don't know what the reason there, but it looks like taking up the reins is going to be Randall Mackey, which is a dual threat top quarterback. He was a JUCO All-American, so I think there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, and going back on last season, a lot of folks thought that when Jeremiah Masoli came in, that was going to be a breath of fresh air for the Ole Miss program, who had struggled with Jevin Sneed, who was, again, supposed to be a highly touted transfer from Texas and didn't really pan out. Well, Jeremiah Masoli didn't really pan out either. Mackey gets a couple of, I guess, starts last year, or not really starts, but a couple of games that he entered and was able to prove some things.
Right, yeah, and that's the thing is it's a lot of transients in this program, at least at the quarterback position, because he's got to fight off another JUCO and Zach Stout and another transfer from West Virginia, Barry Brunetti.
Yeah, and I think that Stout was a JUCO All-American also, is what we were looking at earlier today. And Brunetti was gained. He didn't have to really fight against the NCAA to become eligible right away. So
right.
Houston Nutt actually said this is probably the three best quarterbacks that he's had at one time in his coaching career. And, I mean, that's got to say a lot, but at the same time, you know that you're rebuilding.
Yeah, and they've proven a lot on the JUCO level, but they're unproven in the SEC and the NCAA level, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're going to see is how can they handle that pressure. You know, it's really going to alleviate a lot of things if they can turn around